Close your eyes and picture a farmer. His name does not matter, because history never wrote it down. His hands are cracked, deep lines filled with dirt from years of turning soil, calloused palms that have known only work, his back bent, curved like the hills. He has walked his entire life, from planting rice under the burning sun, day after day, season after season, until his body became the shape of his labour. He has a son, his eldest boy, the one who used to chase butterflies through the rice fields, now a young man with shoulders broad and eyes serious, serving in the army, stationed far away in the northern mountains where winter comes early and fierce, where the wind cuts like a blade, where his father cannot reach him, cannot see him, cannot hold him. The farmer lies awake at night, listening to his wife weep quietly, wondering if his son is warm, if his son is safe, if his son remembers the sound of home. The farmer wants to write to him just 3 words, "Come home safe," but he cannot, because in 15th century Joseon, writing belonged only to scholars, and scholars wrote in Chinese characters, thousands of them, each one requiring years of study, each one a door locked to common people. So the farmer goes to the village to find a scribe, a man with soft hands and clean robes, who sits in a small room that smells of ink and paper. The farmer stands in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his head bowed. The scribe looks up, impatient. "What do you want?" The farmer swallows. I need words written for my son." The scribe sighs, sets down his brush. "How much can you pay?" The farmer reaches into his shirt, pulls out a small cloth bundle. Rice. Precious rice, saved grain by grain from meals his family went without. He places it on the table, his hands trembling. The scribe weighs it in his palm, nods curtly. "Sit. Tell me what to write." The farmer's voice shakes. Tell him to come home safe." The scribe's brush moves, swift and certain, across the paper. Characters the farmer has never seen, will never understand. Symbols that might say, "Come home safe," or might say something else entirely. There is no way to know. When the scribe finishes, he waves the paper to dry the ink, folds it carefully, hands it to the farmer. The farmer takes it, like a precious thing, like a fragile bird that might fly away. He bows deep 3 times, his forehead nearly touching the floor. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He leaves, clutching the letter to his chest, walking back through the village, past other farmers who cannot read, past merchants who cannot write, past children who will never know the shape of their own names. The letter feels heavy, heavier than it should, as if it carries not just words, but the weight of all the things he cannot say, all the love he cannot write, all the fear he cannot name. This paper, this foreign script, is supposed to be his voice, but it feels like someone else's breath, someone else's heart, someone else speaking, while he stands silent, unable to know if his words reached his son at all. This was Joseon, a kingdom of morning calm, they called it. But for most people, there was no calm, only work, only silence. A kingdom where scholars recited Confucius in perfect Chinese, their voices echoing through marble halls, where every official document, every law, every history was written in the language of the Ming Empire, a language that took 10 years to learn, 20 years to master, where the people, the farmers who fed the nation, the fishermen who braved the seas, the mothers who raised the children, the merchants who built the market, the servants who kept the fires, had voices, strong voices, voices that sang and laughed and mourned and loved, but no way to write them down, no way to send a letter, no way to record a memory, no way to leave a name that would last beyond a single life. They lived and died in silence, their words disappear like smoke, like breath on a cold morning, gone, forever gone. Until one king, one man, looked at his kingdom and said, "This is wrong." His name was Sejong, King Sejong. But before the title, before the crown, before history carved his name in gold and stone, he was, simply, a man who listened, a man who wondered, a man who dared to ask why. And what he did next would not just change a kingdom, it would challenge every assumption about power, about knowledge, about who deserves to have a voice. This is not a story about war or conquest, not about armies marching across borders, not about gold or glory or empire. It is about something far more dangerous, far more revolutionary, far more powerful than any sword ever forged. An idea. A simple, radical, unthinkable idea that everyone, every single person, no matter how poor, no matter how unlearned, no matter how forgotten by history, deserved to read, deserved to write, deserved to speak in their own voice, with their own words, on their own terms. And in 1443, in a palace where even the walls seemed to whisper warnings, where tradition pressed down like stone, where the very idea of change was considered treason, King Sejong began to create the impossible, an alphabet so simple a child could learn it in a single day, so logical. It followed the very shape of the human mouth, the movements of the tongue, the flow of breath, so revolutionary that scholars, men who had spent decades mastering Chinese characters, called it treason, called it madness, called it a betrayal of everything they held sacred. But Sejong did not stop. He could not stop, because he had heard the silence of his people, and he refused to let it continue. This is his story, the story of a king who gave his people not gold, not land, not conquest, but something worth far more, their own voice. Before he was a king, before history knew his name, Sejong was the third son, born into luxury, but not into expectation. In royal families, first sons are destiny, groomed from birth to wear the crown. Second sons are backup, trained just in case. But third sons are insurance, a precaution, nothing more. Not expected to rule, not burdened with the crushing weight of the crown, not watched every moment of every day. So young Sejong was free in a way. His brothers never were. Free to do something unusual for a prince, something almost dangerous. He learned not just memorizing the endless Confucian classics that every noble child had to recite word for word without understanding, but actually learning, actually questioning, actually wondering why. His tutors would lecture about the natural order, about heaven and earth, about the way things had always been. And young Sejong would raise his hand and ask, but why? Why did the stars move across the sky in those particular patterns? Why did the moon change its shape each night? Why did crops grow better after rain? What was in the soil that made things grow? Why did Korean words sound so different from Chinese? Why did they feel different in his mouth, different on his tongue, different in his heart? His tutors found him exhausting. Some found him brilliant, others found him troublesome. All of them found him relentless. One day, a warm spring afternoon, when he was 12 years old, still a child, still innocent of the weight he would one day carry, his teacher, an old scholar with a long white beard and patient eyes, assigned him an exercise, a standard task for noble children. Copy this Chinese poem word for word, character for character. Practice your brushwork. Sejong sat at his desk, ground the ink carefully, mixed it with water, just the right consistency, picked up his brush, held it properly as he had been taught, and wrote each character perfect, each stroke precise, each line balanced. When he finished, the teacher nodded, impressed. Good work. Very good work. But then Sejong looked up, his eyes curious, not satisfied, and he asked a question that would change everything. Teacher, if this poem is beautiful in Chinese, why do we have to translate it? To understand it, why do we speak one way but write another? Why can we not write beautiful things in our own language? In Korean, the way we actually speak, the way we actually think. The teacher frowned, set down his brush. That old answer, the answer that had been given for centuries, because Chinese is the language of civilization, of culture, of refinement. Korean is just speaking, just common talk, not worthy of being written down. But Sejong would not let it go. His young voice, clear and certain. Speaking is how we think, he said. If we cannot write how we think, if we cannot put our thoughts on paper, in our own words, are we really thinking at all? Or are we just repeating someone else's thoughts in someone else's language? The teacher opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. He had no answer. Not really, because the boy was right and somewhat deep in that moment, in that question, from a 12-year-old prince who would not stop asking why. The seed was planted, the seed that would, one day, grow into revolution years later, through tragedy, through fate, through twists that no one could predict. His oldest brother, disgraced, banished from court for crimes against the crown, his second brother, dead from illness that no physician could cure. Sejong became king. The third son, who was never supposed to rule, became King of Joseon. He was 21 years old, still young, still uncertain, still wondering if he was ready for this. On his coronation day, the palace prepared. For weeks, they dressed him in robes so heavy, layer upon layer of silk and gold, until he could barely move beneath the weight. They placed the crown upon his head, and he felt the burden of 5 million people settle onto him like stones. He stood in the throne room of Gyeongbokgung Palace, the palace of shining happiness, though he felt no happiness that day. Only weight, only responsibility, only fear that he would fail. Officials bowed before him, hundreds of them, in perfect rows, their foreheads touching the cold floor, their voices in unison chanting, "Long live the king, long live the king." But Sejong was not looking at them. He was looking past them, through the open palace gates, past the guards standing at attention, past the courtyard where ceremonies were performed, past the walls that separated palace from city, toward the city beyond, the real kingdom, where merchants shouted prices in the market, where children played games in the dirt, where life happened, messy and real, in Korean words that would never, never be written down. That night, alone in his chambers, away from the officials, away from the ceremony, away from the weight of the crown, he sat at his desk, picked up his brush, and wrote in his private journal, the journal no one else would ever see. Words he could never say aloud. I am king of a people whose voices I can hear but cannot read. I can hear calling in the street, singing in the field, laughing in the markets, speaking to their children, but when they want to write, to record, to remember, they must borrow someone else's hand, someone else's language, someone else's voice. What kind of king is that? What kind of kingdom is that? What use is my crown if my people cannot speak In their own words, he set down his brush and stared at those words for a long time, not knowing yet what he would do, only knowing that something had to change. It started with listening every morning before the sun rose, before the officials arrived with their endless reports. Sejong would walk through the palace garden, not to think, to listen. The guards thought he was praying. His attendants thought he was ill. But he was studying sound. The way a bird's call started sharp, then softened. The way a servant's laugh bubbled up from her chest. The way his own children said, "Father," each one slightly different, each one unmistakably theirs. One morning, a morning that would change everything. Though he did not know it yet, he stopped beside a pond in the palace gardens, a small pond with lotus flowers floating on the surface and golden fish swimming beneath. The sun was just rising, painting the water pink and gold, and there, crouched by the edge, was a child, maybe 7 years old, maybe 8. A kitchen servant's daughter, her clothes simple, patched and worn, her hair tied back with a piece of string. She was washing vegetables for the morning meal, daikon radishes still covered in dirt, and she was singing to herself a made-up song about a rabbit who wanted to reach the moon. Her voice was clear, pure, unself-conscious, the kind of voice that only children have before the world teaches them to be quiet. The words were tumbling out like water, like light, in pure Korean, not the formal language of the court, but the real language, the language of mothers and children, of lullabies and games, of home. Sejong stood very still, hidden behind a plum tree, and listened, really listened, the way he had learned to listen to everything. The girl sang about the rabbit who jumped and jumped, trying to catch the moon, but the moon was always just out of reach. So the rabbit asked the wind for help, and the wind said, "I will carry you, if you promise to come back to earth to tell everyone what you saw." Sejong felt something catch in his throat. The song was simple, just a child's made-up story, but it was beautiful. It was real. It was Korean in every breath, every word, every note. When the girl finally noticed the king standing there, watching her, she froze. The radish fell from her hand into the water with a splash. Her face went pale. She dropped to her knees, head bowed so low. Her forehead nearly touched the ground, trembling. "Do not stop," Sejong said gently, kneeling down beside her, so he was at her level, not above her, not a king, but a person, listening to another person. "Please, I want to hear the end. What happened?" To the rabbit, the girl's voice was barely a whisper now, shaking with fear. "The rabbit," she said. "The rabbit reached the moon and saw how beautiful the world looked from far away, so he came back to tell everyone that even from the moon, their small homes looked like stars." Sejong smiled, his eyes bright, with something that might have been tears. "That was beautiful," he said. "Would you like to write it down so other children could sing it too?" She shook her head, still not meeting his eyes. "I do not know the character, Your Majesty. I am just a servant's daughter. I will never learn." Sejong looked at her, this small girl, with dirt on her hands and a song in her heart, a song that would die with her. "Unless, what if?" he said slowly, the words forming as he spoke them. "What if there were letters that matched the sounds you just made, letters as simple as your song, so anyone at all, could write what they sing?" The girl looked confused, her small face scrunched in thought. But Sejong's eyes were bright, burning with something that had just ignited inside him. He had found it. Not the answer, not yet, but the question, the right question, the question that would lead to everything. If this child, with her made-up song about rabbits and the moon, could learn to write, could learn to record the music inside her, then anyone could, everyone should. He stood, bowed to the girl, which made her eyes go wide with shock. A king, bowing to her. "Thank you," he said. "You have given me something precious." She did not understand. How could she? She was just a girl, washing vegetables, singing to pass the time. But Sejong understood. He had heard. In her voice, in her song, in the way. The Korean words flowed like water, everything he needed to know. His people had voices, beautiful voices. Voices that deserved to be written, to be remembered, to be heard for all time. And he would give them the letters. To write them down, Sejong gathered the brightest minds in the kingdom. 8 scholars from Jipyeonjeon, the Hall of Worthies. Their names were Jung In-ji, Shin Suk-ju, Song Samun, Park Peng-yeon, and 4 others whose loyalty would be tested in ways they could never imagine. He brought them to a private study, a small room that smelled of pine wood and lamp oil. On the table were pages of drawings, mouths, tongues, throats, diagrams showing how air moved through the body when people spoke. "Your Majesty," Jong In-ji said carefully. "What is this?" Sejong looked at them. "I want to create a writing system," he said, "one that any person in this kingdom can learn. Farmer, fisher, woman, child. I want letters that follow the shapes our mouths make when we speak." Silence. Then Shin Suk, the youngest, leaned forward. "You mean new letters?" "Yes, not Chinese. No, Korean." Another silence, longer this time. Park Peng-yeon cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, with respect, creating a writing system is something only the ancients did. The Yellow Emperor, the sages. It takes centuries." Sejong smiled. "Then we should start now." For months they worked in secret. Sejong studied everything. Sanskrit phonetics from Buddhist texts, Mongolian script from diplomatic letters, even the way Chinese characters were structured. But he kept coming back to the human body. "Look," he said one night, pressing his tongue to the roof of his mouth. "When I make the sound G, my tongue is at the back. Our letter will show that." He drew a simple mark and named it Gyok, the G sound. "And when I make N, my tongue is at the front. The letter changes." He drew another and named it Nian, the N sound. Song Samun stared. The letters looked like the mouth. "Exactly," Sejong said. "Anyone who can speak can understand where these sounds come from. They work through every sound. Consonants shaped by tongue, lips, and throat. Vowels formed from 3 elements. Heaven, a dot. Earth, a line. Man, a standing form." It was brilliant. And it was dangerous, because if it worked, if common people could truly read and write, the power that scholars and nobles held, the power of words, would crumble. One night, Jong In-ji spoke the fear aloud. "Your Majesty, if you do this, the court will turn against you." Sejong did not look up. "Let them turn," he said. "As long as the people can write their own name." News of the project leaked, as secrets always do. In the spring of 1444, whispers spread through the palace halls. The king is creating something dangerous, something that threatens everything we know. A scholar named Cho Manri, a man who had spent 40 years mastering Chinese characters, who had devoted his life to tradition, to order, to the way things had always been. gathered 6 officials, men cut from the same cloth, men who believed with absolute certainty that tradition was more important than change, that order was more important than justice, that the old ways were the only ways. They met in secret, in a room that smelled of old paper and older ideas. They wrote a formal petition, each word chosen like a weapon, each sentence sharp as a blade. They sealed it in red wax, the seal of urgency, the seal that meant this cannot wait, and delivered it to the throne room. Sejong opened it in front of his court, officials watching, scholars waiting, the room silent as death. He read it slowly. Your Majesty, since ancient times, since the Yellow Emperor, since the first sages, great kingdoms have used Chinese characters. Chinese characters are the mark of civilization, of culture, of refinement. They connect us to the great traditions, to the wisdom of the ancients. To create a new script, to invent new letters, is to reject civilization itself. It is to say that the wisdom of 1,000 years means nothing. It will confuse the people who need guidance, not freedom. It will anger the Ming dynasty, our powerful neighbour who could crush us like insects if they choose, and it will invite disaster upon Joseon. Disaster from heaven itself for daring to challenge the natural order. We beg you, Your Majesty, with all respect, with all loyalty, abandon this foolishness before it is too late. Sejong read it twice, his hand steady, though his heart was pounding. Then he looked up. Summoned Cho Man, his voice calm, deadly calm. Come forward. The throne room fell into a silence so complete you could hear the silk robes rustling as Cho entered, bowing low, his forehead to the stone floor, but his eyes, when he rose, were defiant. You wrote this? Sejong asked, his voice soft, dangerous. Yes, Your Majesty, Cho said, his voice strong, unafraid. Every word is true. Sejong leaned forward. In his throne, you believe the people should remain. Unable to read, Cho hesitated, only for a moment. I believe, Your Majesty, there is an order to things, a natural order. Scholars read because they have trained their minds. Farmers farm because that is their place. Merchants trade. Soldiers fight. Everyone has their role. To give everyone the same tools is to erase the difference between them. It is to create chaos where there should be order. And what? Sejong asked. His voice like ice makes a scholar's child more deserving of reading than a farmer's child. What makes one more worthy than another? Cho straightened. Education, Your Majesty, discipline, tradition, years of study, years of sacrifice. These things create scholars, not accident, not luck. Luck. Sejong interrupted, standing now, the king rising from his throne. That is exactly what it is. Luck. The luck of birth. A scholar's son is born into books. A farmer's son is born into fields, not because one is more deserving, but because one was luckier. You call it order, I call it injustice. Cho's jaw tightened, his face reddening. Your Majesty, if you continue this, if you give common people the power to read, to write, the power that has always belonged to scholars, you will destroy everything. You will be remembered as the king who defied heaven, who brought chaos, who ruined a perfect system. The room held its breath. Sejong stood, tall and straight, his voice no longer soft, but ringing clear through the throne room. Then I will defy heaven, he said. If heaven believes that knowledge belongs only to the few, if heaven says that a farmer's voice is worth less than a scholar's, if heaven demands that millions live and die in silence, then heaven is wrong. And I will defy it. He gestured to the guards, who stepped forward, their hands on their sword hilts. Cho Manri, you are stripped of your position, of your rank, of your honours. You will be imprisoned, not for speaking, but for believing that silence is the same as peace. You will stay there until you understand that every person in this kingdom deserves a voice. The room gasped. Courtiers stepped back. Scholars looked at each other in shock, in fear, in disbelief. Cho was dragged away, his shouts echoing through the marble halls, screaming, "You will regret this. You will destroy us all. The people do not need voices. They need order. They need guidance. They need us." But his voice faded as he was dragged into the darkness. Sejong stood there, trembling now that the moment had passed, watching the doors close behind Cho, the throne room, still silent, still stunned. That night, alone in his chamber, the weight of what he had done crashed over him like a wave. His hands shook as he poured tea, the cup rattling against the table. He had turned his own court against him. He had made enemies of the most powerful men in the kingdom. He had defied not just scholars, but tradition itself, the idea that had stood for 1,000 years. But he also knew with absolute certainty that some things are worth the cost. Some things are worth fighting for, even if you fight alone, even if you lose everything. The voice of a farmer's child is worth the hatred of 1,000 scholars, and he would not stop. He could not stop. Not now, not ever. As the years passed, Sejong's health failed. He developed a disease of the eyes, likely diabetes, though they had no name for it then. His vision blurred, then darkened, then slowly the world became shadows. By 1444, he could barely see the letters he had created. His son, Crown Prince Munjong, came to him one evening. "Father," the physicians say, "you must rest. The work is killing you." Sejong smiled faintly, sitting by a dim window. "If I rest, they will bury the letters. The moment I close my eyes, they will say, 'I have lost my mind,' that the letters were the fantasy of a sick king." "Father, Munjong, come here." His son knelt beside him. Sejong placed his hand over his son's. "Read me the letters," he said. "All of them." Munjong read them aloud. "Gyok, Niun, Daigut, Real, Mium." Sejong closed his eyes and listened. Each sound was clear and distinct, each one a key that would unlock the silence of millions yet unborn. When Munjong finished, Sejong whispered, "They are alive. Even if I cannot see them, they are alive." He paused. "Do you know what I see when I close my eyes?" His son shook his head. "I see a farmer writing to his son. I see a mother teaching her daughter to read. I see a kingdom where every voice can be heard." Tears ran down Munjong's face. "That is why I cannot rest," Sejong said softly, "because those people are waiting for me." September 1446. After 3 years of secret work, refinement, testing, and revision, the book was ready. Its title, Hunminjeongeum, the correct sounds for the instruction of the people. Sejong had it printed on the finest paper, bound in silk, with a preface. In his own hand, "The sounds of our language differ from those of China and do not match the Chinese characters. Therefore, the common people, though they wish to express themselves, cannot do so. I have created 28 new letters so that everyone may learn them easily and use them in daily life. 28 letters, not thousands of characters. 28. The book explained each one, how to write it, how to pronounce it, how to combine them into syllables. It was elegant. It was scientific. It was revolutionary. On the day of the announcement, Sejong gathered the court. In the throne room, officials stood in their ranks, silent and wary. Sejong, nearly blind, held the book in his hands. "I present to you, Hunmin Jonggyum," he said. "These letters belong not to me, but to the people of Joseon. A wise person can learn them in a morning. A foolish person can learn them in 10 days. No one will be voiceless again." He nodded to an attendant who brought forward a young boy, a servant's son, no more than 10. The boy trembled. Before the court, Sejong handed him a sheet of paper. "Read this," he said gently. The boy looked at the letters. They were strange, but the sounds were familiar. Slowly, haltingly, he read, "Heaven, earth, person." The court went silent. A common child was reading the king's words. Sejong placed his hand on the boy's head. "You see," he said, "this is not magic. This is justice." Some officials bowed, others turned away in anger, but the king did not care. Outside, in the streets of Hanyang, in villages beyond the walls, the letters were already spreading. A merchant copied them into a ledger. A mother traced them in the dirt for her daughter. A monk carved them into a temple pillar. The scholars could protest. The nobles could resist. But the words had escaped the palace. And words once born do not die easily. 4 years later, in the second month of 1450, the year that would mark both an ending and a beginning, King Sejong lay dying. His body, once strong, once young, now worn, like old cloth from illness that no medicine could cure, could endure no more. He had given everything, every ounce of strength, every moment of health, every year of his life, to the letters, to his people, to his dream. And now, that dream complete, his body had nothing left. His children gathered around him, all of them. The ones who would carry on, the ones who would remember. The room was quiet, so quiet you could hear the silence between heartbeats, only his shallow breathing. Each breath, a struggle. Each breath might be the last. And the soft rustle of silk as his family shifted, unable to be still, unable to accept what was coming. His wife, Queen Sohon, who had stood beside him through everything, through the opposition, through the hatred, through the lonely nights, when he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. She held his hand, her grip tight, as if she could keep him in this world by the strength of her love alone. "Do you remember?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Our wedding." He smiled faintly. That smile that had always made her heart sing. Even now, even at the end, you poured tears. He breathed each word an effort, so carefully. Your hands were shaking. She laughed, a sound between joy and grief. "I was afraid," she said. "Of what? That I would not be enough for you. You were studying the stars, the moon, the movement of the heavens. How could I, a simple woman, be enough for someone who wanted to understand everything?" He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "You were everything," he said. "You are everything. You believed when no one else did. You stood when everyone else turned away. Without you, there would be no letters, no voice for our people." She leaned closer, her tears falling on his hand. "They will remember for the letters." He shook his head slowly, weakly. "No," he whispered. "They will remember the people who used them. I am only the one who listened. I am only the one who dared to believe that every voice deserved to be heard." Munjong his eldest son, the crown prince, who would soon be king himself, knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears. "Father," he said, his voice shaking, "the letters." The scholars still resist. They say they will bury them. The moment you close your eyes, what if they are forgotten? Sejong turned his head toward his son with great effort. "They will not forget," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but certain, absolutely certain. "A mother will teach her child. That child will teach another. The words will travel, not through palaces, not through courts, not through scholars who write decrees, but through hearts, through homes, through the small moment when a mother bends down to show her daughter how to write her own name." He drew a slow breath. "I did not create letters," he said. "I created freedom, and freedom, once tasted, is never forgotten. You cannot untaste it. You cannot unlearn it. You cannot take it back. Once a person writes their own name, they will never, never be silent again." He turned his face toward the window where the morning light was beginning to creep through. "Listen," he whispered. They all fell silent, listening. Outside, the city woke. A vendor calling out his wares, fresh fish, fresh vegetables, his voice singing through the streets, children laughing in the distance, playing some game, their voices bright with joy, the sound of life in Korean voices, Korean words, words that would now live forever. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "Yes, father," Munjong said, weeping openly now, unable to hold back the grief, the love, the loss. "That is what I fought for," Sejong whispered, his voice fading like mist. Not silence, not order, not tradition. Sound. Life. Voice. The sound of my people speaking. Those were his final words. He died. As the sun rose, painting the sky, gold and pink, his hand in his wife's, his eyes. At rest. His work. Complete, they say. The wind. In Gyeongbokgung Palace, the next morning, sounded like pages turned, like a book being opened for the first time, like a voice beginning to speak after a lifetime of silence. After his death, the court tried to bury his creation. They called it Eonmun, the vernacular script, a dismissive name, meant to keep it small. For centuries, official documents stayed in Chinese. The elite refused to use Hangul in formal settings. Scholars mocked it. Nobles ignored it. But the people did not forget. In markets, merchants kept accounts. In Hangul, at home, mothers taught daughters. In temples, monks copied teachings so common people could read. It survived in love letters written by moonlight, in folk songs shared from village to village, in recipes penciled on kitchen walls. The alphabet, meant to be forgotten, became the secret language of the heart. Centuries passed. In the late 19th century, Western missionaries arrived and marveled. Even common people could read and write. One wrote home, "The Korean alphabet is the most scientific writing system I have ever seen." In the early 1900s, as Korea struggled against foreign powers, scholars began to see Hangul as identity itself. Newspapers printed in Hangul, schools taught it beside Chinese. What had lived in secret stepped into the light. Then came the darkness. 1910. A year Korea would never forget. Japan annexed Korea, swallowed it whole, erased it from the maps, and for 35 years, 35 long years, they tried to erase the language too. Children were beaten, for speaking Korean in school. Teachers, Japanese teachers with harsh voices and harsher hands, would stand in classrooms and listen for the sound of Korean words, and when they heard them, the punishment was swift and brutal. A ruler across the palms, a cane across the back, stand in the corner. Shame, humiliation, pain, until the children learned to swallow their words, to speak Japanese even in their dreams. Books in Hangul were burned, stacks of them piled in the street. The paper that carried songs and poems and stories and dreams reduced to ash. Names were changed, Korean names, names that carried family history, names that connected children to their ancestors, to their roots, erased, replaced with Japanese names, as if by changing a name you could change a soul. But the letters refused to die. In prisons, dark cells, where freedom fighters were held for daring to resist. Men scratched hang into walls with broken spoons, with their fingernails, with anything they could find. Creating poems, creating messages, creating proof that they were still Korean, still alive, still refusing to be erased. In hidden schools, secret schools that met in basements, in attics, in forests, grandmothers, old women who remembered, who refused to forget, whispered lessons by candlelight, teaching children to read, to write in their own language, risking everything, risking their lives, because some things are worth dying for. In forests, in the mountains, where freedom fighters hid from Japanese soldiers, they printed secret newspapers on old printing presses, hidden in caves, the ink precious as blood, the paper worth more than gold. Newspapers entirely in Hangul passed from hand to hand in the dark of night, keeping the dream of independence alive. An old woman, a grandmother who had taught children for 40 years, was arrested, dragged from her home by soldiers who found Hangul textbooks hidden under her floor. They took her to a cold room, made her stand for hours, and an officer, young, arrogant, certain of his power, looked at her and asked, "Why risk your life for letters, for words, for a dying language? You are old. You could have lived in peace. Why choose suffering?" The old woman looked him in the eye, her back straight, her voice steady, and she said words that would echo through history, because a people without their language is a people without their soul. I would rather die than live without mine. They imprisoned her, beat her, tried to break her, but she did not break, and the children she had taught, dozens of them, hundreds of them, children who are now adults with children of their own, kept learning, kept teaching, in whispers, in secret, in the dark, keeping the language alive, one syllable at a time, one letter at a time, one heart at a time, because Sejong had given them not just an alphabet, but a reason to resist, a way to remember who they were, no matter what the occupiers tried to make them forget. August 15th, 1945, Korea was free. People poured into the streets, weeping, shouting, singing in Korean. The new government declared Hangul the official script. Schools opened, books written entirely in Hangul, offices typed documents in Hangul, newspapers shouted headlines in Hangul. The language once forbidden became the language of freedom. A teacher who had taught in secret stood before her class. On the board she wrote, "Yurimal, our language." She turned to the children. This is what they tried to take. This is what we refused to lose. Remember it. Treasure it. Because 500 years ago, a king believed you deserved it. If you walk through Seoul today, you will find him, a bronze figure in Gwanghwamun Square. King Sejong the Great. He sits with a book in his hands. Face serene. Eyes meeting yours. Even in metal. Around him, the city hums. Neon signs. Subway maps. Menus. Messages. All written in the letters he gave his people. Children run past, laughing in Korea, texting in Hangul, reading books their ancestors once could not. Tourists take photos, students study on the steps, and sometimes, late at night, someone stands quietly before the statue as if to say thank you, because they understand what he gave them. Not just an alphabet, a voice. Every October 9th, South Korea celebrates Hangul Day, the day a king gave his people their own voice. Schools close, festivals bloom, children dress as consonants and vowels in playful parades. For Korea, this was a victory over silence, a victory over inequality, a victory over the idea that only the few deserve to speak. When you see Hangul on a book cover, a street sign, a screen, remember it was created by a king who believed that every person, no matter how poor or unlearned, deserved to write their own story. And because of him, they did. Sejong never raised an army, never expanded his borders, never carved his name on monuments of war. Instead, he gave his people something far more powerful, the ability to say, "This is my name, this is my thought, this is my voice." And in doing so, he became the most beloved king in Korean history, not because he ruled well, because he listened well. He listened to a farmer who could not write to his son. He listened to a mother who could not name her child on paper. He listened to a girl singing by a pond. He listened to a kingdom whose words lived only in the air. And then, quietly, with ink and breath, he gave them the power to speak. Today, more than 75 million people write in the script he created. Scientists call it one of the most logical writing systems ever made. Linguists study it as a masterpiece of phonetic design. UNESCO honours its legacy of literacy. But for the Korean people, it is simply this: the sound of home, the shape of their thought, the voice that no one can take away. If you stand in Gwanghwamun at dawn, as the city wakes, you may feel the presence of a king who never left, who sits in bronze, watching his people write, read, and speak, doing everything he dreamed they could do. And somewhere in the quiet space between sounds, King Sejong is still listening, still watching, still smiling. Because he knows the letters live, the voice endures, and his people will never be silent again.